A few years ago I lived in the city and didn't own a car. Late-night walks became a habit for me. They were calming, with the streets quiet and still. But one night, those walks became something I would never forget. It was around 2 a.m. when I found myself walking down a deserted street lit by scattered streetlights. The air was heavy, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel amplified. As I strolled, I noticed someone in the distance. He was dancing. Not gracefully. It was more of a jerky, exaggerated shuffle. His legs kicked high, his arms flailed oddly, and it all seemed wrong, like a marionette with tangled strings. He wore a suit, and as he glided under the streetlights, he seemed to be coming closer. I paused, uneasy. Something about his movements didn't feel right. It wasn't joyous or even natural. It was mechanical, like he was mimicking what he thought a dance should look like. Unnerved, I crossed the street, but my heart sank when he mirrored me, still dancing. As he got closer, his face became clearer. His grin was impossibly wide, too forced to be real, like a mask of joy that someone had glued onto his face. But his eyes didn't match. They were cold, lifeless, and fixed on me. "Hey!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want?" He didn't answer. He just kept dancing, his grin widening further as his legs kicked higher. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. He followed, still dancing. Finally, panic set in, and I broke into a run. My footsteps echoed down the street as I ducked into a shadowy alley, breathless. I pressed my back against the wall and listened, but the night was silent again. Peeking out, I saw nothing. The street was empty. Relief washed over me, and I convinced myself it was just a prank by some unhinged person. But as I stepped back onto the main road, I froze. There he was, standing perfectly still under a streetlight. His grin was gone, replaced with something worse. A predatory hunger in his eyes. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment. Once inside, I locked the door, checked the windows, and sat by the peephole, watching for any sign of him. Hours passed, and he never came. 1 month later, I woke to the sound of shuffling feet. I lay still, my heart pounding as I listened. It was faint but unmistakable. Soft, deliberate steps moving slowly across my apartment. Dread settled in my chest as I opened my eyes. He was there, standing at the foot of my bed. The light from the street outside cast him in a dim, eerie glow. His grin was gone, replaced by a blank expression. His head tilted slightly, like he was studying me. I tried to tell myself I was dreaming, but when I blinked, his head tilted the other way. His fingers twitched, curling and uncurling, as if preparing for something. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, his voice seemed to echo from the walls, low and gravelly. "I like to watch you." Adrenaline surged, and I bolted upright, reaching for my phone on the nightstand. My hand fumbled, and for a moment I glanced away. That was all it took. When I looked back, he was no longer at the foot of the bed. He was crouched beside me, his face inches from mine. His dead eyes stared into mine, unblinking. I screamed. His grin returned. Slowly he leaned closer and whispered in my ear, "Run." I did. I sprinted out of my bedroom, down the hall, and out of the apartment, fumbling with the locks on the door. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. The corridor was silent. No sound of footsteps, no shadow under the door. Still, I wasn't taking any chances. I ran down the stairs out into the street and didn't stop until I reached a brightly lit convenience store 2 blocks away. The clerk looked up, startled, as I burst through the door. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. I opened my mouth to answer, but froze. In the reflection of the glass door behind me, I saw him. The man stood across the street, his head tilted, his grin wider than ever. I backed away, trembling. The clerk glanced outside, but when he looked, there was nothing there. "No one's out there," he said. I knew better. I didn't go back to my apartment that night. I spent the rest of the night in a motel, the lights on, my eyes glued to the door. When morning came, I cautiously returned home. Everything was as I left it. No evidence anyone had been there. For weeks, I lived in constant fear, jumping at every creak, every shadow. I bought new locks, installed security cameras, and stopped going out after dark. Eventually, I convinced myself it was over, that he was gone, until the shuffling returned. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again, the soft, deliberate footsteps crossing my living room. This time, I grabbed my phone immediately, turning on the camera flash as I pointed it toward the bedroom door. The door creaked open. I hit the flash, and for a split second, the light illuminated him. He was right there, his face inches from mine, his grin impossibly wide. The light vanished, and I dropped the phone in terror. From the darkness, his voice came again. "You can't run forever." When I woke up the next morning, the apartment was empty. No sign of him, no evidence he'd been there. But my phone lay on the floor, its camera app still open. The last photo was blurry, but in the center, clear as day, was his face. And that smile.